In case you missed it, here's a Sports Animal Rewind.
Let's talk college football. It's time for the Sports Page Summer of College Football, presented by Buddy Gregg RVs and Motorhomes, our daily preview of teams and conferences around the country for the upcoming college football season. Find Buddy Gregg RVs and Motorhomes on their Facebook page, their website at buddygregg.com, and follow them on Twitter at Buddy Gregg RVs. Now let's take a look at the LSU Tigers.
To help us do that, we bring in from TigerBait.com, covering the LSU Tigers, does a terrific job. Friend of the show, Bryan Lazare, joins us here on the show. Hey, Bryan, Vincent, Brendan, Quinn, how you doing this morning, Bryan?
Good. How you guys doing today?
We're doing great, Bryan. Great to hear from you. We appreciate you. Zach Mettenberger, let's start with him. He talked about some of the guys that he has there on offense. What's a realistic expectation for the next step for Zach Mettenberger at quarterback?
Well, look, he certainly has to play a lot better than he did last year if LSU, is going, let's just say if they're going to win 10 games this year. If LSU is going to be a double-digit winner, Zach Mettenberger has to play a lot better. Zach last year, completed in the, right around the 60% mark in passes. He had 12 touchdowns. He had 7 interceptions. So he had decent numbers, but not the type of numbers that, you need to have from a quarterback if you're going to, win a championship. I really think is one thing that happened. I think the hype of Mettenberger when he came in really had people's expectations much higher than what actually turned out. And I think this. I compare Zach Mettenberger to Cam Newton and Schaefer, who went to Tennessee for a while. Those guys the three guys all had similar backgrounds. Started in an SEC school, got kicked out of an SEC school, went to a junior college where they were spectacular, re-signed with another SEC school. Cam Newton was great. Schaefer was not. And Mettenberger was probably in the middle in his first year. So he gets a new offensive coordinator now in Cam Cameron. So it's really going to be interesting to see what happens. I think that the change in the coordinator, it's not the people as much as the structure. Last year, for the last 2 years after Steve Cragthorpe was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, he had to give up the coordinator's job. He was just the quarterback's coach, and the offensive line coach, Greg Stadrawa, took over play calling. And really, look, that didn't work. I really believe the play caller has to be with the quarterback through practice every day, and that wasn't the case. And then when you got to game days, you have your offensive line coach upstairs calling plays and not on the field talking with the offensive lineman, in between series. So I think from a structural standpoint, I think that the change with Cam Cameron would help, and certainly with his experience coaching quarterbacks and the little bit we were able to watch him in spring practice, where he is very detail-oriented person, that you would hope that, Mettenberger would show improvement this year.
Yeah, you talked about his numbers from last year, this Mettenberger, but from the first 8 games to the last 5 games, his numbers did improve over those final 5 games. I think completion percentage was up, yards per pass was up. So do you think, was that more of a product of a young receiving group kind of coming into its own with guys like with Landry and Beckham, or do you think that is you saw more of what Mettenberger was capable of, and that's the guy that you'll see more of this season?
I think it's all a mix. I don't know, the receivers last year, LSU for a number of years always had that one big-time receiver, a Reuben Randall, Early Doucette, a Brandon LaFell, a Dwayne Bowe. And last year, the 2 best receivers were 2 sophomores, Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry, and neither one of those guys, they're not, top 2-round NFL draft picks. So I think that certainly didn't help Mettenberger's progression. And then you had the offensive line, which in midseason was totally, in disarray. You lost Chris Falk, your best offensive lineman, at left tackle early in the year. Then you lost Josh Williford, a 2-year starter at right guard, in the middle of the year in the Florida game with a concussion. And at the same time, Alex Hurst, a 3-year starter at right tackle, had some personal problems and quit the team. So the last half of the season, you were playing with one redshirt freshman and one true freshman on the right side of the offensive line. So, it's all come into play where you had Mettenberger, a first-year starter in the league. You had an inexperienced and not quite as talented receiving corps. You were retooling your offensive line in midseason, and then you had a structure on the offensive staff where, the play caller really was never around the quarterback during practice. So I guess all of those things weren't the best conditions for Mettenberger to show improvement. And I think that's why people are thinking he's got a year under his belt, the structure's better, and that he'll play better this year. I know this. He has to play better for LSU, to have a chance to win 10 football games.
Joined by Bryan Lazare, covers the LSU Tigers for TigerBait.com. So, Bryan, moving ahead to 2013, as you set it up with talking about Cam Cameron and Zach Mettenberger being back and some of those things maybe being improved, talk about the rest of the offense, how it sets up and the line, the weapons around Mettenberger, the running game, and everything projected on offense with Cam Cameron.
Well, the wide receiver position, the two best receivers from last year, Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry, are both back. Those are two solid guys. Landry led the team in receptions last year. Beckham led the team in receiving yardage. They're SEC-type receivers. They have two senior backups, Kadron Boone and James Wright, both of whom have seen a lot of playing time in their career. And then I think the big help there is Traven Durrell, who is as a true freshman last year, suffered a knee injury in August practice, had surgery, was redshirted for the year. He came back. He worked all through spring, was healthy, looked pretty good. So, again, LSU has some experience there at wide receiver, and I really expect that position to be stronger this year. The tight end spot, there's some questions there. Chase Clement, who was the starter for the last year, was a senior, so he's out of eligibility. Then they have lost another player, was elected to transfer to McNeese, and so they are now left with Richard Dixon's younger brother, Travis Dixon, who is one tight end, and Dylan Gordon, who is a sophomore. So it's really an inexperienced group at tight end. I think that's one of the question marks going into the season. How is Dixon and Gordon, and they picked up a junior college transfer, Logan Stokes, how are those guys going to mesh together to give LSU the type of depth that they need at the position? Because they're still going to use two tight ends a lot. And when I'm saying two tight ends, they're going to use, one tight end, one H-back, besides the two tight end alignment. I would say that during spring ball, I think that those guys progressed fairly well, but they certainly have to make more improvement over the summer. The offensive line, everybody was expecting LSU to really have some problems in 2013 on the offensive line because they were going to have to rebuild it. Well, the rebuilding took place during the 2012 season, so really they got now a lot of experience back. Trey Turner had to start the last half of the year at right guard as a redshirt freshman. Vidal Alexander had to start the last half of last season as a true freshman at right tackle. Both those guys are back. Josh Williford, who missed the last half of the year with a concussion, he's back, ready to go. They're moving him to left guard. And then Lael Collins, probably LSU's best offensive lineman, has been moved outside from left guard to left tackle to handle that important position. And Collins, who was a tackle in high school, again, did a pretty good job adjusting and moving back outside. went fine in spring. So really, you look at it, those 4 linemen are all guys who have started games. The only newcomer is going to be Elliott Porter, who will step in at center for P.J. Lonigan. He was the backup to Lonigan last year, and he'll be a junior, and he'll start at center. Depth on the offensive line is a problem, and that's because nobody on the second unit has played, and so if they get injuries, and they've had injuries in the offensive line the last 2 years, if they get injuries on the offensive line this year, it's going to be a problem because they're going to be going to guys who have never played in a game. Finally, running back, and this is really surprised to hear this, where there are questions about LSU's depth at running back. That's something which has never been a problem, but that it is up in the air this year, and it's primarily because of the status of Jeremy Hill. Jeremy Hill is a true freshman, came in last year, was the best back the second half of the season, and then got into some legal problems, and he has been suspended from the team, and really his next appearance in court is August the 15th, and I say he's in limbo to that time. So when LSU starts practice in the beginning of August, I do not expect to see Jeremy Hill out there. I don't think there'll be any change in his status at least into the middle of August. So now you're down Jeremy Hill, probably your best returning back. Then you have Alfred Blue, who was the number 1 back last year and got off to a great start and then suffered a knee injury in the 3rd game of the year and missed the remainder of the season. He was back out there in spring, no contact. He said he was about 90% and was running pretty good. But again, here's somebody coming back off of knee surgery. You have Kenny Hilliard, who 2 years ago was spectacular as a freshman. He had the great SEC championship game against Georgia, but he had a bad sophomore year. He got off to a pretty good start the first 3 games as Blue's backup. But when Blue went down and they put more responsibility on Hilliard, he didn't respond. So you don't know what you're going to get from him. He's somebody that has to bounce back from a poor sophomore season. And they only have 4 tailbacks on scholarship. The only other one is Terrence McGee, who's had 20 carries in 2 years. So those are the only 4 scholarship tailbacks, and if you look at it, 1 has never played, 1 had a bad sophomore season, 1 is coming off knee surgery, and 1 is suspended from the team right now. So, if Hill gets back on the team and if Blue stays healthy and Hilliard rebounds, LSU will have as good a running backs as anybody in the league.
Yeah.
But if those things don't work out, LSU could have as bad a situation as anybody in the league at running back, and you certainly haven't said that very often about LSU in recent years.
Yeah.
So Bryan, I mean, as the same story every year with LSU, big, strong, talented, fast, but it's going to come down to the close games. I'd assume when you look at the schedule, it's. Do you think kind of big picture is just going to be the same old thing, whatever their record is in the 6, 7, 8. 3-point games that they end up playing in, it will end up, determining where they go, what they do, who they are?
Yeah, look, this team needs to get off to a good start. They open up the year against TCU in Arlington at Cowboy Stadium. TCU certainly is a very good team, but it's not like 2 years ago when LSU opened up with Oregon. Of course, LSU is not as good as its team 2 years ago. But and they open up with TCU, then they come home with UAB and Kent State. Kent State was a good MAC team last year, but still you'd say, well, they should win those 2 games. And then they play Auburn. You say, in Baton Rouge, you say they should win that game. So if LSU beats TCU, you should say, all right, they should get off to a 4-0 start, and then they have back-to-back road games, or they have 2 road games with Georgia and Florida. So then they also have Ole Miss, and Mississippi State. So looking at the schedule, if they sweep September and are 4-0, then they have Georgia and Florida and Ole Miss and Mississippi State. They have. I said Florida was on the road. Florida is at home. Mm-hmm. If they could somehow get 3 of those 4 wins, and would be 7-1, and going into the bye week before the Alabama game, they're back in the same situation they are every year. They'll be playing Alabama in a game to see who's in control of the SEC West. But I think the LSU fans can't get too far ahead of themselves this year. The first step, they need to beat TCU in that opener, and then worry about getting better as the season goes on.
Bryan, last couple things real quick. Only have a few more minutes. Is this going into this year? Is this the lowest expectations for LSU football in quite a few years? When's the last time you remember these expectations of this team not being as good as it is this year?
Well, I don't know if the expectations of the fans are any lower.
Yeah.
But you're right about that. And look, if when the polls come out and you put them all together, LSU is going to be the number 6 team in the SEC. They're going to be behind Alabama and Texas A&M in the West. They're going to be behind Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida in the East. They're going to be the number 6 team. And, LSU will be able to fly under the radar nationally. I don't think you can hear any talk about LSU in August, and, which is probably a good thing. There's a chance, and they're going to be rebuilding on defense. But, John Chavis has done an exceptional job in his time at LSU. They got young players who he feels are very, very talented. They just haven't, played a whole lot. They got a lot of program players. They got guys who are in their 3rd and 4th years who are now going to get opportunities to start, and they're going to have to play well. But, being under the radar this year, I think that will help this LSU team.
Yeah, if you could touch on that defense, replacing all those guys that left early for the NFL, and then if also you think there's any 1 or 2 true freshmen or newcomers, first-timers that could make an instant impact for LSU.
Well, the biggest question mark, the biggest area where you have questions is the defensive line, where everybody, LSU lost 3 defensive ends who got drafted, Mingo, Montgomery, and LeVar Edwards. They lost Benny Logan, who left early, a defensive tackle. Josh Downs was a senior last year who started defensive tackle. So that's their first 5 defensive linemen. They have 3 guys who've been backups for 2 years, tackles Anthony Johnson and Ego Ferguson, and then Jamario Rasco, who all were very, very good players. They played well as freshmen. I think they plateaued a little bit last year as sophomores. Now they're all going to be in the starting lineup this year, and those 3 guys have to play well. Just like on the offensive line, though, there is little depth, and they are definitely going to need true freshmen to come in and help out in the situation. Frank Haran is a defensive end that they need to come in and hopefully can get some snaps. Greg Gilmore is a defensive tackle that they're hoping can come in and give them some snaps. And again, that's the defensive line is the biggest area of concern. Linebackers, they lost Kevin Minter, but they returned Lamine Barrow. They returned Taj Jones. Both those guys are 5th-year seniors. They'll be okay there. And the secondary, they'll be fine back there, even though they lost Eric Reed because they had 3 or 4 guys who got a lot of playing time last year and are back this year. Craig Lawson is probably the best player in the secondary at safety. Mm-hmm. So I really think the back 7 will be fine. The question is the front. And to describe this LSU team this year, LSU the last couple of years has had injuries and off-the-field issues, which has cost people starts. They were still able to more or less handle that and win 10 games last year and, had the undefeated season until the championship game against Alabama 2 years ago. The depth on this team this year isn't good enough where they can withstand all those injuries. So if they get those injuries or off-the-field problems which cost them players in 2013, I think you're going to see them, slip into an 8 or 9 win team. If they stay healthy and no problems, they'll have a shot to win 10.
Bryan Lazare covers the LSU Tigers for TigerBait.com. Bryan, always great to talk to you. Thank you so much for doing it. Have a great weekend.